Welcome back to Life, Biz, and all that jazz. I'm your host, Jasmine Lisciotto, and if you're new here, welcome. Welcome along on the journey. I'm so excited to have you here with me. And if you've come back for more, thank you. Thank you for trusting in what I share and my guests and our community that we're building together, because no one needs to be alone. I just want to start off with saying that I love what today's guest is all about. And I love what all my guests are about, and that's why I have them on here, because I can see their vision. But there's something with today's guest that just really hits home for me. And we are connected in a way in a few different things, and one of them being bipolar. And as you know, my dad was diagnosed with bipolar and he took his life 9 years ago. So I think what we're going to talk about today is really, really important to continue to honor my dad's legacy and just try and help people understand more about mental illness and how they can try and have a better life and live with it. So today's episode is with our guest, Anthony Palacin. Anthony has a very unique story, and I'm so excited to talk about his story, his beliefs, and his visions, and what he offers in a way of support and understanding, research and education to, help you to understand your life a little bit better. And we're going to talk a lot about the flow state, which I think is really cool. There's so many good, juicy topics that we're going to talk about. So you've heard enough from me. So let's bring in Anthony. Welcome, Anthony Palacin. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing really, really well. It's so lovely to have you on today. I'm really, really excited just to have a chat with you, because I think a lot of what you do is very relatable with the current times and how people are trying to manage different illnesses such as like ADHD. And I think the holistic way is a lot more popular now. I think people are doing more research. People want to understand it a bit more than, just going to a doctor and just taking some medication. So I'll start off with a little bit of my background, but pretty much for 36 years, I went undiagnosed with ADHD and OCD, but I was always put into that category of like, you're a girl, people don't really notice it. And also I was just high functioning. I had therapy and they told me, oh, it's high functioning anxiety, it's not this, it's not that. And I would question a lot of things. It only got to a point where 2 years ago, I stopped drinking alcohol. I wasn't getting any joy from it. And the alcohol is when other things started to pop up. And I find that was my dopamine. That's how I was kind of regulating my dopamine, and then also drinking a lot of coffee. So it was that balance, I'm sure you can imagine. I tried to stop drinking coffee and I just couldn't focus. Like I couldn't get through my day. And then that's when I went and, spoke to another psychiatrist, and they did some more further testing, and they're like, you have ADHD and OCD. And I was like, oh, finally, someone's listening to me. I felt like I went all that time, but my whole life without any medication. Like I've never really liked medication. I've always tried to be fit, eat healthy, meditation, journaling. There was so many things that I tried to do before getting to a point where they said, well, if this isn't all working, and I had a lot of pressure and stuff in my life with my business, I was quite busy, and I just felt like it started to affect everything else. So 6 months ago, they put me on some medication for anxiety, and where that helped a little bit, it helped me with my anxiety and not think as much, which then allowed me to focus a little bit more. It still didn't really help me get through my work day. So then they said, okay, well, now we'll try dexamphetamine. And I tried that, but I felt like I had to keep increasing my doses. So I've stopped taking that altogether now. I've been using a lot of supplements and just finding natural things again to, try and balance it out. And it's obviously a learning curve. I think that's where I'm getting to now. Is I just wanted to kind of give our audience like kind of a little background of my story, because I think there can be a lot of people that relate. I don't know what your algorithm's like on your social media, but mine at the moment is a lot of late diagnosed women with ADHD. And I think that's because I've, been searching for stuff. So I'd love to get your opinion on the medication, or wherever you kind of want to take it off from here.
It's a great question. I'm not one to put any labels of good or bad. I take a very spiritual perspective on life, and I actually had to learn to get that spiritual perspective because of bipolar and
Mm.
ADHD. And actually, these illnesses, these diseases that are labels, they're really just teachers. They're teachers about what are our initial conditions, what are our psychological wounds and traumas as a human being, kind of our karma, our history, and the way we adapt to life is essentially self-medication, whether that takes the form of a pill, an illegal drug, or a behavior like gambling compulsions, sugar addiction, caffeine overconsumption. All of this is to be taken as information, basically. And with that information, depending on our goals and our intention, we can then start to decipher um, the lessons that we need in order to reach our goals more smoothly or more healthily.
Wow, that's a really interesting and insightful way to explain it, because I think when we really break it all down, that's what it all is. It's not necessarily just you're labeled with something, okay, this is your category and you fit into this category, because it's obviously a wide category. I know that you openly talk about bipolar.
Just a little clarification there. The official story is I was diagnosed with bipolar because I did
Yes.
experience psychosis and mania. And that
Yes.
was 7.5 years ago,
Mm.
with my last episode being 5.5 years ago. In the whole journey that it's taken me to get to the point where I'm at today, I do believe that the bipolar is a misdiagnosis, and actually, the symptoms that looked like bipolar were actually the results of unknown ADHD that was not
Wow.
diagnosed,
Yeah.
plus trauma, plus the circumstances in my life, the peak of stress that was the trigger to the episodes. So it's a complicated puzzle because there is no doctor, there is no psychiatrist who can tell me this is the truth, and there is no test to say, oh, look, you've got this and that gene, you are bipolar or you are ADHD. No, there isn't a single thing like that. So you really have to be your own scientist. And this is what I've been doing for the last 8 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's very interesting what you've just said then about the misdiagnosis. Because one of my friends, she also has ADHD, and we were talking about my dad. And I know I've mentioned to you, my dad had bipolar and there was a lot of manic episodes. It was spread out over a certain amount of years, but a lot of it was really based on external factors. It wasn't just out of nowhere. There was a lot of things, going on, and he had a problem with gambling as well, and also smoking marijuana. So there's like all these factors. And one day we got into this deep conversation, and she said, what if there isn't bipolar, like what you said? What if it's obviously something that's diagnosed to a deeper level, and there's obviously, with the manic episodes and psychosis, that all comes together. But that's such an interesting point that you've mentioned there, and it does sometimes make me a little bit sad to think where I'm at now with my awareness and, all the work that I've done. If my dad was still here, could I have helped? And I know I can't think back, but it's always something that when you lose someone in that way, I guess the best thing I'm doing now is why I have started the podcast, and I really have this mentality of healing out loud when it's not easy. It's not, I don't always want to just show up online and, show these vulnerable sides to myself. But there was times where I was in a position where I did feel so alone, and I just didn't think there was another option out. It got really dark. And like you said, doing your own research and finding out the deeper causes of it, and not just listening to a doctor. And I guess it can also be different as well, is if you are diagnosed at a younger age, where it's that conditioning that you would have had, say some child that's, 5 years old, medicated by their parents from that age. When they get to a certain age as well, there's so many factors now in research that relates to heavy drug use and alcohol from being medicated as young as a child. But then you've got the other side when you're diagnosed when you're an adult. The level of awareness seems to be a bit broader, and I feel like similar to what you're saying about doing the deeper research. Is that Is that something that you find when you talk to people, if they do find out later on in life, do the deep conditioning and where this comes out? Do you find that, people are a little bit different in their perspectives of what you're doing and uncovering more about ourselves than just accepting a diagnosis?
To be honest, based on my experience, it's really been a mixed bag. There are some people who have gone beyond diagnoses and really done the deep research, and really these people tend to have been self-led for quite a while, and probably because they've been in such deep pain. The times that we're living in today, there's also gonna be a big percentage of people who have ADHD, absolutely, but there's also another big percentage of people who have ADHD symptoms but don't necessarily have ADHD. And that's simply a symptom of the times that we're living in, with all the stress, the overwhelm, the messages, the emails, the constant bombarding of everything all the time. And so it's really hard to separate what is the truth, what is the environment's contribution versus what is the genetic or neurodevelopmental contribution. And then on top of that, regardless of if one is genuinely ADHD or not, there are techniques where one can improve their impulse control, their focus, their emotional regulation as just skills. And so when we have, on one hand, the skills that we can improve, and on the other hand, when we have the lifestyle that we can improve, i.e., getting a better job, getting more pay, working less hours, finding a better work-life balance, when you combine these two things to the best that you can, how much of the ADHD symptoms would remain? That's a big mystery. And so I'm basically here to help people make sense of that whole puzzle, because I had to make sense of it for myself because of bipolar.
I think a lot of people are getting misdiagnosed these days because of exactly what you said. The environment, we are so much more susceptible to the dopamine hit, and we're constantly chasing that dopamine. So our dopamine, like our hedonic set point where our dopamine level is lower than what it should be. You constantly need to chase more to hit your dopamine levels. And I think there's definitely a lot of misdiagnosis now because people, they say that it's been diagnosed more. There's a big link in a lot of research now that ADHD, autism is being diagnosed more. I think one, it's more awareness, but then I also think it's a lot to do with the environment. What is like some other misconceptions that you think people have about ADHD? Like you've obviously mentioned a few, and what would you suggest when it comes to coping or just kind of understanding if is it really ADHD or is it my environment? Like how do people kind of tell the difference between both before having to go and look into it deeper? Because in Australia, to get diagnosed, it's about a 6 to 12-month wait if you go through the public system right now. So this is what I mean by a lot of more people are thinking that they have it, or a lot more awareness is there, and there's a lot of trends though. I hear people kind of just jokingly say about it, and I was like, well, if you knew what my brain was like, you wouldn't be joking about it, like, because I'm combined. So I'm the inattentive and then the hyperactive, but just depends on who I'm around with the hyperactive, whether I'm masking it more than what I want, or if I'm just, being myself, like now, like not even just rambling on.
I feel you. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of really great subjects that we're touching on there. I think to answer the question about how do we separate whether it's environment versus actual brain wiring, I don't think there's any other way than doing the work of starting to learn kind of learn a bit more about the brain and states of consciousness and how to map your day, your habits based on what you know about the brain, and starting to really train those skills. So I mentioned things like impulse control, emotional regulation, but behind that, there's a framework that I've developed. I call it the flow profile, and it's a set of skills which evaluates You know, how strong is your sense of purpose? How strong is your sleep? How strong is your exercise? How strong are your productivity skills, like focus and single tasking and separating the goal setting from the doing of the goals? All of these things most people don't know. And when they know the skill and the neuroscience behind why it's more biologically aligned and efficient to operate in that way, you can start to train it and you can start to see results. And all of a sudden, ADHD symptoms will start to lower. And I mean, this is the stuff that people notice on the surface. I'm less clumsy. I'm less forgetful. I'm more organized. Okay, that's great. And this is all a part of how I teach flow states essentially. But yeah, and meditation is the, I think, single biggest thing for impulse control and clarity and just being able to kind of focus again. I mean, I used to be the kind of person that struggled to meditate for 30 seconds. And I've been meditating for more than 8 or 9 years now, and I can easily meditate 10 minutes plus. I've even reached 30 or 40 minutes of meditation. And it's not because there's anything special about me. I was in the same position as anyone who decides to start meditating today. But I've seen the value. I understood the science behind it. I understood the benefits for my brain, and I got the experience of feeling better from doing it over and over and over again. And I have the forgiveness. I've trained myself to be forgiving of myself, to wander off after 10, 15 seconds and just go, no, back to focusing on the breath. And this sign is not a sign that one cannot meditate. It is part of the process. This is what's having self-forgiveness and compassion. You're training a skill. You know, you can't tell yourself, you can't beat yourself up for not being a bodybuilder if it's day one at the gym. It's a process, and it takes consistent compound effects of working on it.
I think that sometimes can be the hardest part for change. And when people want to embark on this, you know, they want to be better, they want to uncover these factors about themselves and really dive into, why am I thinking this way? Why do I behave this way? Why do I react this way? You know, impulsive. And it's also easier to default to the habits. And that's where I think it's really important with what you're sharing. Is it's about understanding, and it's not easy and it's not an overnight fix, but it's really about breaking it down into smaller steps. So, you know, not just jumping in all at once, it's starting with something little. So what would you suggest someone to start with, say, for meditation? Because I think meditation is so powerful, and I also think people don't understand our brain in a way. And when you said that word neuroscience, oh, whenever I hear neuroscience, it's just like, to me, it's like gold. I just love learning about the brain. And I think the more you understand it, and even for me, with researching for the podcast, like there's more things that I've implemented in my life that I probably wouldn't have if I didn't understand it. And one of the biggest things that I always love to share is about subconscious. And we don't realize how powerful our subconscious is. So doing that journaling, doing that meditation, it's in giving yourself grace. And like you said, not punishing yourself for not being able to meditate on day one, because we wouldn't go into a gym and expect to be able to lift heavy. What would you say to someone that is, you know, trying to start out and kind of at step one? What would be your kind of tip to start with?
For meditation specifically, or more of a general?
What would be your most, like, your recommended practice in a way for you that helps you focus or with your overwhelm? So I think overwhelm is a big factor. We're very overwhelmed in life, and if you don't understand how to regulate your nervous system, how to really bring yourself back, environment is a big thing, and just having a few steps could uncover a bit more about what you need to focus on in your environment or what you need to change to start to build that flow state like you were talking about.
Yeah, so for meditation specifically, I have two go-tos. One of the things that really changed my life was sitting on a chair. I mean, before that moment, I had the belief that I had to sit cross-legged on a pillow with my hands a certain way, like making circles of my fingers and kind of looking like the guru that's meditating in a cave.
Yeah,
But
like,
actually just yeah, just sitting on a chair with your back straight and your hands on your thighs, and just comfortable. Because I would always find myself breaking in meditation because I was in an uncomfortable position. And when someone taught me that, no, 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 position, the most important thing is to be comfortable. And that really changed the game for me. And now my defaults as far as going into the meditation, I inhale and then I count on the exhale. So I go in, and then when I exhale, I go one, and then I repeat that, and I see how far I can go. And it doesn't matter if you reach 15 one day, and then 7 the next day, and then 30 the next day, and then 5 the next day. Overall, when you keep sticking to that practice, you'll find that you can go further and further. And yeah, just basically keeping at this simple practice. And if there's a little bit of resistance to, that sounds boring, da 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 da, flip that thought of that sounds boring, because it will actually get your brain in a state that is more ready and more focused and more able to do whatever it is that you consider not boring right after. So it's not about the meditation practice itself. It's kind of like it's a workout for your brain. It's not meant to be it's not meant to be as stimulating as Instagram, and that's the point. It
Mm.
has the effects of regulating you much better.
And you will feel better. And even though Instagram might give you that quick dopamine hit, it doesn't last. And it's going to make you just constantly pick up your phone and not even notice about it. So there's something that you mentioned on our previous conversation that you haven't been taking medication. Touch on that a little bit more. And I know that you mentioned that was actually approved by a medical professional. And I think that's when I first thought about, oh, I'm so excited for our chat, because there's so many people now, I think, that you do go to a doctor, and I find even just chatting with friends, the first thing they kind of do, you go in there and say that you're depressed or you're down, and they just say, oh, well, you can go on this medication. And I think hearing from someone like yourself that's done all this work and, now shares it all, I think it's really important. So I'd love to know a bit more about that. Like, what made you get to that point? Obviously, you're doing all this work and you said you've been meditating for years. So how did you get to that point now when you took away medication altogether, or where you're at with that?
Yeah. I'll speak to that in just a second, but before I forget, I wanted to circle back to the other parts that you mentioned previously of the question around
Oh, yes.
the
Yep, you
biggest
go.
myths. Yeah, my head also holds a lot of information at once, and I think it's important to hear, partly because it relates also to this subject. I think
Perfect.
one of the important things about ADHD specifically is the D in disorder. I mean, this, to most people who are getting influenced by society and or getting labeled by a system, it automatically rings a negative connotation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think it's just a diversity rather than a disorder. And I think people should really start thinking about it in that way. I think there are advantages. I think it ultimately boils down to self-understanding and self-mastery. But I think ADHDers have a tendency to be able to go and stay in a flow state for super long. Now, that has a good and a bad side. But if you want to write a book in a day, you probably could do that better than compared to a neurotypical person, if it's something that really motivates you. But the dark side of that you really have to manage, is not getting into something like mania, and not getting into something like sacrificing your sleep and your recovery and or other important things. It's very easy to kind of get sucked into what you want to do and forget what you have to do. And this is also part of the learning curve that needs to be built. And so, related to reframing ADHD as a disorder, actually, one of the most important things for people to investigate for themselves is coming up with their own belief about the origins of ADHD. There's a few different arguments out there. A lot of people say, yeah, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. Sure. But neurodevelopmental, just means it develops while your brain is developing. What is the root cause of that neurodevelopmental difference? That is what you should investigate. For me, there are two major theories out there that I kind of subscribe to. And I can't tell which one is right or which one is wrong, but the point is having these two reference points really helps to reframe the question. There's one that says it's an evolutionary advantage. It's the kind of people who have ADHD are the kind of people who are up for exploring new territories, who are up for hunting animals, taking risk, and just being a little bit more sensitive to novel stimulation and sounds and things out there in nature. So that already kind of gives it that superpower from evolution standpoint and not really anything to fear. Just a superpower that is maladapted to the modern world because it was not tailored towards it. And the other side is there's another proposal that is a coping mechanism for trauma in the same way that maybe people turn to drinking or turn to gambling or whatever it may be. Maybe ADHD, the impulsivity or the distractibility is in itself a way to protect you from something that hurts emotionally. And so when we frame ADHD in these two lenses, already we have a huge paradigm shift compared to it's a disease and or disorder. So I think that's really, really important that people start to make their own investigation about that.
That was powerful. I love that because I've researched stuff as well. And I thought, well, if I have it, then, they say that one of your parents do. And it's like when I was younger, my brother got diagnosed, but he was only young and they didn't think I did because I was a girl. And then it just goes back further because it's also, they say it can be like your environment when you're growing up, that things can not necessarily like switch on, but it can bring it out. So yeah, that's something I think there needs to be more research, and hopefully, over the years there will be more research, or you might even do some research. So yourself, become a professor. You sound very knowledgeable.
I appreciate that.
I'm actually doing a course on neuroscience. So it's a grad cert. My background is hotels and then marketing now, but I love that psychological side of marketing. So this is kind of to put into the business, but then also for my passion project, which is my podcast and sharing and healing out loud. So that's very interesting. So did you want to swing back and touch
We
on?
can,
Yeah, it's up to you. You take the floor. I'm very
but
excited just to sit here and to listen to all these great conversations, and the audience is going to love this. I'm so excited.
yeah, happy to circle back to the medication conversation.
Yeah, it's just like I said before, I talked to so many people, and a friend of mine, she was overwhelmed and they just automatically just put her on antidepressants. And it's just, there's so much stuff now and our doctors aren't investigating. They're so busy, I find as well. I don't know, that's how it is here in Australia. But so I'd love to know more about like kind of how you got to that process. And I'm also interested, obviously, myself now, not taking ADHD medication anymore because I just want to try and do it naturally. And I've gone my whole life without it. So it did seem like a quick and maybe a fix that was going to help me. And it does help. I can do if I sit there and do focused work, but it was the point where I felt like I had to start taking more for it to work. And I don't want to keep taking higher and higher doses. I don't like to take anything anyway as it is. And especially, not drinking. Like I'm really trying to look after my health in every way that I can. So yeah, I'd love to hear your point on that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with medication. As with anything else, you could be damned if you do, and you could be damned if you don't. It all depends on so many factors. And I want to kind of pre-frame this that I'm not one to say that medications are the devil.
Mm.
I've taken medication for years. At some points, I do believe it was necessary to control the manic symptoms that I had because I was not able to function in society. I mean, I've been hospitalized twice, once for 9 days and once for 28 days. Medications are just one tool. Life is a whole other set of tools. Your environment, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your exercising, your sleep, your mindset, your connection to spirituality, your diets, all of these are the other tools. And so it's a fine line. Sometimes you need medication to compensate for something else that's missing. But while you start kind of figuring out what other pieces are missing or what other pieces need to be optimized, then you can start slowly letting go of medication because it will have fulfilled its purpose. For me, one of the biggest pieces was the trauma awareness. I had both of my bipolar episodes completely unaware that I had experienced trauma. I had the belief that I had a happy childhood. I always had food on the table, loving parents that are still together. There's no trauma in me. But you tell that to a 4 or 5 year old child whose brain is developing, your standard for what would be trauma as an adult is very different to that 4 year old's standard of what would be traumatic. And so when I started having binge eating symptoms, actually, is when I started having conversations with my parents. Because I used to be a fat kid when I was in my teens, and that's what actually launched me into self-development. I struggled with relationships and confidence because I was a bigger kid. I was 30 kilos plus heavier than I am today, 60 pounds or so. But yeah, the binge eating led me to doing some research about, like, I've quit drinking, I've quit smoking, I've quit partying till late and sacrificing my sleep. Like, why the heck is binge eating coming now in certain circumstances? And so I had conversations with my parents, and I shortly discovered that there was a big trauma that happened for me that I was totally unaware of. And that's the thing. A lot of the times, things are buried so deeply in our subconscious that we just have no idea until we start digging, until we start peeling the onion. And so that really got me into a path of really tackling the most subtle things in my life. Like, if binge eating looks like having 2 pizzas and 3 tubs of ice cream, which was happening a few years ago, today, when I have half a pack of cookies, I go, there's something there to learn. Because having half a pack of cookies is still not aligned with my health goals and values. Having one or two, I can accept, but half a pack, no, not really. So there is something there that I am medicating with that cookie. And the lesson is finding out what. Is it loneliness? Is it whatever it may be? Is it stress? Is it lack of sleep? Like tiredness? That's the thing to make sense of. So for the medication journey, basically I had my 2 bipolar episodes in 2017 and 2019. And I was taking antipsychotics more or less the whole time until the end of 2024. Now I've been 6 months free, and I want to be humble enough to acknowledge that if I need antipsychotics again, because life happens to be so stressful or so whatever it is, sure, I can take them. I'm not against it. But the awareness that I've built from this journey has led me to being much more able to notice the symptoms on the rise and give myself the natural self-care first before it gets so extreme as to need antipsychotics. And the healing journey that I've been on to process the trauma, and also the spiritual journey that I've been on to make sense of all of my bipolar manic psychotic thoughts, those have all been integrated on a much deeper level. And it's the combination of all of that, plus the learning that I've done in flow, plus finding a strong sense of purpose and having clear goals in my life. All of this together is what gives me that confidence to have quit the medication. And actually, the process of doing that was I went to my psychiatrist and I presented him with my ADHD theory, because I didn't know about ADHD until way later. And so when I started reading about ADHD, I thought, oh my God, this is me. like ever since I was a kid, I was spending hours in a flow state playing poker. I was spending hours on video games. I was procrastinating everything till the most last minutes in high school. And only whatever got done was only what interested me, not what I had to do, because I wasn't interested in it. So I went to the psychiatrist and I presented him with the theory. I laid out my whole life and I said, these are all the things that I've been medicating my ADHD with at each phase of my life. When I was in high school, it was poker. When I was in university, it was this. When I was in my first job, it was psychedelics and festivals. When it was blah, blah, blah. And I said, I actually want to get the diagnosis for ADHD in order to switch from antipsychotic meds to ADHD meds. I wasn't going with the intention of quitting my meds. I just wanted a change of medication to the right meds. And through the testing process and through the conversations with the psychiatrist, he basically said that I did enough work on my symptoms that it wasn't worth the risk of taking additional medications instead. He said, let's just quit the antipsychotics and monitor. So that's the phase that I'm in right now. I'm 6 months plus free from antipsychotics and I'm monitoring. And hopefully, things go well. But if not, then it's just more lessons.
That's great. And I think like you said, you had put all these practices in place, and medication is just a tool. It's not the only option. In obviously saying this, it's not some people, they need it. And like I said, I tried it and I just felt like it wasn't for me. Explaining it how I am is not to say that if you do take any medication that, there's anything wrong with that. I think that there's just so many other options as well to look into if you can, and having the resources. But I think what's really important is knowing that you can't just take medication and everything's going to be okay, and still have the bad habits and not understand like the deeper causes of a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the reasons that you are having those behaviors and reacting. Something else that I thought was really interesting is like when you're uncovering what you said about like when you're a child, because like you said, our subconscious, we just bury it behind, and we have a lot of patterns that we take from childhood. And I think a lot of the times once you do start that journey of self-awareness, self-discovery, and understanding who you are more as a person and why you do things, it can be a little bit scary because you also got to do a lot of unconditioning and unlearning to then take yourself to that next level. And that's where I like to always explain to the audience is that it's not an overnight fix, and it's not to put pressure on yourself that you have to have it all figured out at once. It's the little steps and just working on something little each day till you can build up and start to have more of a rhythm. I know you mentioned a few times now the flow state, so I would love for you to explain to people that don't really understand what it means, because we obviously know what it is, but people that are in the middle of the overwhelm, they want to do something. What's your best explanation of the flow state feeling? What would you say to someone that doesn't understand it?
So, flow is a state of being and a state of consciousness. And the most easy way to identify what it is actually to think back in your life to an activity that you so enjoyed and you were so absorbed by that activity and so present in it that you completely lost your sense of time. You might have spent 2, 3, or 4 hours doing that activity. And at the end of it, you go, wow, that was 3 hours. It felt like half an hour. So that's the hallmark of flow. And there are more characteristics to it, but I think anyone who's experienced a deep flow state can really anchor to what it is based on that. Some people, it will be, oh yeah, that's when I was writing. Oh, some people, oh yeah, it's when I was doing some coding. Oh yeah, it's when I was doing some painting or some art.
How would you say that it relates to mental well-being and physical well-being? So overall, like if you're constant, in that flow state, how is that going to ripple on to the rest of other areas of their lives?
It's a great question. Being in a state of flow, the brain releases a lot of really positive neurochemicals that feel good. Essentially, your internal pharmacy is really hyped up when you're in a flow state. So you've got dopamine triggering it. You've got endorphins to kind of free you from pain. So if you're sitting down for 4 hours, you don't feel the pain of sitting down. You're just so absorbed into it. It releases also anandamide, the bliss chemical, which is the equivalent of the chemical that makes you high when you're on marijuana. It's basically the internally generated version of the marijuana cannabinoids. And on the back end of a flow state, you also release some serotonin and oxytocin. So, I mean, all of these things really leads not just to a chemical feel good, but also there's a psychological feel good that comes from having done whatever you've done in a flow state. So whether it's just a really fun activity or whether it's something that you've accomplished that you're proud of, there's this dual benefit of the pharmacological and the psychological.
That's a really good way to put it. I think that will explain it in a term where anyone will be able to understand. So that was really good. I think you mentioned before about, spirituality and neuroscience. Neuroscience, obviously, it's based on a lot of fact. You think about it, and then spirituality, you can sometimes think that they don't really go together. So how would you bring them together? So how do they kind of support
Yeah.
each other?
Yeah, I think spirituality is the bridge between the immaterial and the material. Like right now, neuroscientists don't understand the mechanism of memories and visualization and thoughts. We know that it happens because if I say think about an elephant or think about an apple, you can already picture or I kind of guide your brain in that direction. But the mechanism by which that happens is still a mystery to science. And at the same time, one of the greatest problems in the world right now is the hard problem of consciousness. We know that there is an experience that we are having because you and I are sharing this universe that we are a part of, but we don't fundamentally know we don't fundamentally know the mechanism why all this is, as opposed to nothing at all. And since a long time, human beings have been trying to explain why it is, and that's why religions and all of these different explanations have come up. I think ultimately there is a mystery to life and the universe, and it's a mystery that we have to make sense of, because making sense of that mystery for ourselves has real positive benefits on the science of our manifested reality. This is where just the example of placebo effects and its opposing twin, the nocebo effect. If I give you a neutral pill, if you believe it's good, it's going to help. If you believe it's bad, it's going to hinder. So, what is the mechanism behind that? There is something deeper than what science can explain at the moment. Science observes it, and hopefully one day we will have the answers. But for now, anything that science does not answer, for me, I turn to spirituality and my own lived experience to make sense of it.
I think that's really important because we can do a lot of research and try and understand things, but a lot of the times, the most we will understand and the most knowledge that we will gain is through lived experience. And I think that comes back to people that are unsure where to kind of start in this journey and what to do if you don't have the skills to do your own research, if you don't have the skills or anyone else to reach out to. I think it's really important, to connect with people that have done it or are doing the work. So that's obviously like something that you're focused on now. So do you want to explain a little bit more about your offerings and what you do to help people understand this and break down and learn the tools? And you've got a lot of obviously great information I've already read on your website. So I'd love for you to explain it in your terms.
In my terms, I think what's really important is the fact that the technology that we've created as human beings is not going anywhere anytime soon. And there is also a planet that we are hurting by having all this technology and all these lifestyles. So as much as there is a side related to values of our shared earth and preserving it so that we and our future children can keep enjoying this experience of life. Where flow fits into that puzzle is to basically become the best version of yourself that is possible. At the most basic, it's a training in focus and productivity, but on a much deeper level, it's also a training on understanding yourself, understanding your brain, and also healing from patterns that don't serve you. So for me, flow is going to be one of the mandatory superpowers of the next generation human being. And my aim is to make that as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And you don't need uh, a university degree. I aim to make it accessible to a 16 or 18-year-old kid because yeah, it's quite simple actually. It's just a little bit of basics that need to be mastered in order to get 80% of the results. You know, you can always go deeper. Of course, there are people who have PhDs studying flow. But, the way I teach it is to be able to get 80% of the results in 20% of the effort.
That's with everything in life. And it's not as hard as you think, is that you have to give it 100%, like you said. One thing I want to touch on now is if you could give advice to somebody, and I always like to go back and think about us before you went on that journey, and something that you wish that, someone told you. What would you tell someone listening today that, thinking back 7 or how many years back, if someone told you something then to help you kind of have a little bit more of a, not necessarily a kickstart to your journey, just a little bit of support when you're in that doubt phase or before you kind of started it, to understand when you're kind of still confused and needed to embark on this journey and do your own research?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would have been to not lose my own empowerment. I think I was really deeply affected by my state when I was depressed after being diagnosed with bipolar. My state and my belief in being limited by bipolar was something that led me into a bit of a helpless position. I didn't have agency. I didn't have motivation. I didn't have the desire to do or change anything. I was kind of like, well, I'm stuck. I'm like this. I have nothing that I can do about it. But the reality was they don't know for sure. There's no 100% conclusive test. It's actually a guess that they made. They guess about the diagnosis, they guess about the medication, and then they see if it improves it or not. And if it was framed in that way, if I could have unpacked with the medical system that it's not for sure, it looks like, but there's many other possibilities, I might not have lost all of my sense of agency and power. And I would have reassured myself that there's nothing especially wrong with my body. It's actually responding in the same way as any body would, given the same circumstances and understanding. And so that's quite reassuring because it takes away the you of the equation, and it just kind of makes it a little bit more okay to kind of be with the situation as it is and start scanning for the lessons that need to be learned, because there are lessons that need to be learned. For me, some of my greatest teachings of bipolar was the fact that I needed to make sense of my psychosis experiences and I needed to heal some trauma. And now that I've been through that, I have a lot more confidence that the chances that any issues related to it would happen again are very minimized. So yeah, that's the big thing. Agency in yourself and trusting that your body, whatever criticisms you have of it, is responding absolutely perfectly normally given the circumstances and situations. And if my soul were in your body, it would do the exact same thing. So it's not you, it's a much bigger, more complex picture.
That's a really deep and emotional way to put it. I think the way that you've explained it, because when you get labeled to have a disorder or anything when it comes to a mental condition, there's so much stigma. And that's why I openly talk about, bipolar and ADHD. And obviously, with my dad taking his life, like, I've talked about it and I'm open about it, because I think the more that we can be open about it, it's a part of society, and it's not the end of a road when you have a diagnosis. It can be the beginning of uncovering and understanding yourself more and allowing yourself to live better, because now you have a foundation of why you might do things, and it might be a bit more clearer to the way that you react, and being able to learn different coping mechanisms to reduce the overwhelm or reduce the manic episodes, or it could be also reduce your anxiety and depression and bring you back to being your best self. So there's always a lot. I could talk about stuff like this for hours, and I love it. And I think I love what you do and what you're sharing, and I think that's really, really important. So do you have anything else that you wanted to share with the audience today?
I think if you have goals, if you want to improve yourself, whether that is freeing up more time, more energy back into your day, or want to increase your well-being or the depth of your presence in relationships, I think flow is definitely one of those cutting-edge new tools based in science that you should check out. Whether it's through my own offerings or not, there are plenty of offerings out there. Yeah, I highly, highly recommend. I've done a lot of self development since being a 15-year-old kid struggling with my weight, to the point of being 32 and quitting antipsychotic meds. And honestly, flow is one of the biggest things that had the greatest impacts in my life.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you for doing everything that you do and sharing what you do. I think it's very powerful. And I can see, you've already helped a lot of people, and you're going to continue to do that. So I will link all Anthony's details in the show notes. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you? With socials as well?
Happy to be contacted through socials, typically Facebook or even Instagram or LinkedIn or
Yes.
via my websites. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll link everything on. So doesn't matter what channels, people are on all different channels these days. But I
Mhm.
think the
Mhm.
website's the best. I found a lot of really cool info on there, and I downloaded your free PDF, which is great to get started, to see and understand a little bit more about it. So that's always a good place to start. Thank you again for your time today, and I look forward to chatting to you in the future.
Thank you so much. Likewise.